Get up, kid. Get up before I make you regret being born. The boot connects with his ribs. Caleb Whitmore doesn't move, not because he can't, but because moving means leaving the unconscious man behind him exposed. Blood drips from his lip onto the diner floor. 3 football players circle him like wolves. No one in Bakersfield knows it yet, but in less than 48 hours, 500 motorcycles will surround this same broken road. Before we go further, subscribe, follow this channel, and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The bell above the door of the Route 99 diner jingled at 2:47 in the afternoon, and nobody, not Caleb, not the cook, not the 2 truckers nursing cold coffee in the corner booth, had any idea that the next 90 seconds would rewrite the rest of his life. Caleb Whitmore was 18 years old, blonde lean in the way boys get when food is something you ration instead of enjoy. He'd been wiping down the counter for the 3rd time in 20 minutes, not because it needed it, but because standing still made the ache in his stomach louder. His mother's rent was due in 6 days. He had $41 saved. The math never worked no matter how many times he ran it in his head. "Caleb, table 4 needs water," the cook barked from the kitchen window. "Got it, Mr. Reyes?" He grabbed the pitcher. That was when the door opened again, and a man the size of a refrigerator stumbled through it. The man was easily 6'4", built like he'd spent 30 years hauling engines, with a leather vest covered in patches and a beard streaked gray. He took 2 steps toward the counter, and then his eyes rolled back in his head. "Sir." Caleb dropped the pitcher. Glass shattered against tile. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man, Jack Bear Callan, though Caleb didn't know that yet, collapsed sideways into a booth, his massive body sliding to the floor in a heap of leather and muscle. His skin had gone pale and slick with sweat. His breathing came in short, wet gasps. "Someone help me!" Caleb shouted. The 2 truckers in the corner just stared. Mr. Reyes peeked out from the kitchen, froze, and ducked back behind the grill, like he hadn't seen anything at all. "Oh God," whispered the only waitress on shift, backing toward the register, like the dying man might reach out and grab her. Caleb dropped to his knees beside Bear. He'd seen this before, not exactly this, but close enough. His uncle had been diabetic. Caleb had grown up watching for the signs, the confusion, the sweating, the way a grown man's whole body could just shut down like a power line cut mid-storm. "He's diabetic," Caleb said more to himself than anyone. "He's going into shock. I need sugar, orange juice, candy, anything." "Kid, just leave him be. We don't know this guy," one trucker started. "He's dying," Caleb snapped, and something in his voice, raw, sharp, furious, made the trucker shut his mouth. Caleb ripped open the candy display by the register, tore the wrapper off 3 chocolate bars with his teeth, and pressed them gently against Bear's lips, trying to get him to chew, to swallow anything. "Come on," Caleb muttered. "Come on, stay with me." Bear's eyes fluttered. A low groan rumbled out of him. That's it, sir. You're okay. I've got you." The bell above the door jingled again. 3 young men walked in loud before they'd even crossed the threshold, the kind of loud that fills a room and dares anyone to ask them to quiet down. Troy Dawson led them, tall-built, like he played a varsity sport, and made sure everyone knew it, wearing a university hoodie like a badge of entitlement. Behind him, 2 teammates, just as broad, just as smug. "What is this, a hospital now?" Troy laughed, looking at Bear crumpled on the floor with chocolate smeared on his beard. "Looks like Santa Claus had one too many." His friends laughed. Caleb didn't look up. "He's having a medical emergency. Could you call 911? Could you call 911? Troy mimicked in a high-pitched voice, and his friends laughed harder. "Listen to this, kid. You work here." "Please," Caleb said, voice tightening. "I need someone to call an ambulance. Now." Troy crouched down next to Bear, studying him the way someone studies roadkill. "Big, tough biker, huh? Look at him, drooling on himself like a baby." He reached out and flicked Bear's cheek with 2 fingers. "Wakey, wakey, big man." "Don't touch him," Caleb said. The diner went dead quiet. Troy turned his head slowly, like he hadn't quite processed the sentence. "Excuse me. I said don't touch him." Caleb's voice shook, but he didn't back down. He stayed kneeling between Troy and Bear's unconscious body like a human wall. He's sick. He could die. Have some decency. One of Troy's friends, a thick-necked kid named Dez, stepped closer. You hear this little dishwasher talking to us like that? I'm not trying to start anything, Caleb said, and his hands were trembling now, but his eyes weren't moving off Troy's face. I just need you to either help or get out of the way. Troy stood up slowly. He was nearly a foot taller than Caleb, twice the muscle mass, and he smiled the way a predator smiles when it realizes the thing in front of it isn't actually a threat, just an obstacle. You're gonna tell us what to do, Troy said. In your own diner, you're a busboy kid. You're nothing. Call an ambulance, Caleb said again, steadier this time. Please. That word please seemed to enrage Troy more than any insult could have. He shoved Caleb backward hard, both hands against his chest. Caleb stumbled, but caught himself against the booth, refusing to fall, refusing to move away from Bear. Whoa, whoa, the waitress said weakly from behind the register phone finally in her hand. I'm calling. Shut up! Dez snapped at her and she froze. Caleb's pulse was hammering now, but something deeper than fear had taken root in his chest. Something that felt like it had been waiting his whole life for a moment, exactly like this one. He'd spent 18 years being invisible. The kid nobody noticed. The kid whose father left before he could walk, whose mother worked double shifts at a laundromat, who ate free lunch at school and never told anyone because the shame burned hotter than the hunger. But right now in this diner on this floor, there was a man who would die if Caleb stepped aside. So he didn't step aside. I'm not moving, Caleb said. Troy's smile vanished. Say that again. I'm not moving, Caleb repeated louder. The first punch came without warning. Troy's fist crashing into Caleb's jaw with enough force to spin him sideways into a table. Plates clattered to the floor. Caleb's vision exploded into white static, and for half a second, he genuinely thought he might black out. But he didn't fall. He grabbed the table edge, steadied himself, and turned back around, putting himself between Troy and Bear's body again. Are you serious right now? Troy laughed, though there was an edge of disbelief in it now, like he hadn't expected the kid to get back up so fast. You want more? He needs help, Caleb said through a mouth already filling with blood. I'm not leaving him. Dez grabbed Caleb by the collar and threw him to the ground. Caleb's elbow cracked against the tile floor pane, shooting up to his shoulder, and before he could even process it, a boot slammed into his ribs. Get up, kid! Get up before I make you regret being born! Troy snarled, standing over him. Caleb curled instinctively, but even as pain tore through his side, he twisted his body so that he was still positioned between the boy's and Bear's unconscious form. Another kick landed against his back. He grunted, but didn't cry out. Stop it! The waitress screamed. Stop! I called the police. They're coming. Good! Troy said, not even glancing at her. Let them see what happens when some nobody decides he's a hero. Another kick. Caleb's vision blurred. Somewhere distantly, he heard glass breaking, chairs scraping, someone shouting his name. Mr. Reyes finally brave enough to step out from the kitchen, swinging a broom like it might actually do something against 3 grown athletes. It didn't. Dez shoved him backward into the counter hard enough to knock the wind out of him. Caleb's whole body screamed in protest, every nerve telling him to curl up to protect himself, to give in. But his hands stayed locked around Bear's wrist, gripping it like an anchor, like proof that he hadn't moved, hadn't betrayed the only promise he'd made in the last 60 seconds of his life. I'm not leaving him. You done? Troy asked, crouching down to Caleb's level, grabbing a fistful of his hair to force his face up. Caleb's eye was already swelling shut, blood running from his nose and lip. You done playing hero? Caleb spat blood onto the floor and looked Troy dead in the eye. He didn't do anything to you. Something about that, the sheer stubborn refusal to break, made Troy's jaw tighten with fury. He raised his fist again, and that's when the sirens finally wailed outside. Troy froze mid-swing. His friends exchanged a glance. Cops, Dez muttered. We're gone, Troy said, dropping Caleb's hair and standing up straight, brushing off his hoodie like he'd just finished a workout instead of beating a teenager half to death. He looked down at Caleb one last time, sprawled on the floor next to an unconscious biker twice his size. "This isn't over, dishwasher. You don't talk to me like that and walk away clean." The three of them shoved past Mr. Reyes and out the door, just as red and blue lights swept across the diner windows. By the time paramedics rushed in, Troy's truck was already peeling out of the parking lot, gravel spraying behind it. Caleb lay on the floor, one hand still wrapped around Bear's wrist, blood dripping steadily from his nose onto the tile. Everything hurt. His ribs felt like they'd been stomped flat. His vision kept tunneling in and out. "Sir, can you hear me, sir?" A paramedic dropped beside Bear, checking his pulse, his pupils calling out vitals to his partner. Another paramedic knelt next to Caleb. "Hey, kid. Stay with me. Can you tell me your name?" "Caleb." He mumbled the words, slurring through a swollen lip. Is he okay?" "The biker. Is he gonna be okay?" "We're working on him. You did the right thing. Getting sugar into him might have saved his life. What's your name again, son?" "Caleb Whitmore," he said, and then weaker. "Don't let him die. Please don't let him die." The paramedic's eyes flicked toward him with something like surprise. This kid, beaten bloody, more worried about a stranger than himself. "We've got him," the paramedic said gently. "We've got you both. Just breathe." Caleb closed his good eye and let the world go fuzzy at the edges, the sirens and shouting blurring into a low hum. The last thing he remembered before the ambulance doors closed was Mr. Reyes's voice, shaky and furious, telling the police everything: the boys, the names, the brutality, and a single thought looping through Caleb's pounding skull over and over: I didn't even know his name. 3 miles away at Mercy, General, Caleb sat on the edge of an ER bed while a nurse cleaned the cut above his eyebrow, his mother Diane gripping his hand so tight her knuckles had gone white. "Why?" she kept saying, voice cracking. "Why would you do that, baby? Why would you put yourself between 3 grown men and a stranger?" "Because nobody else was going to," Caleb said, wincing as the nurse dabbed antiseptic against his split lip. "He was dying, Mom. He would have died. And you could have died protecting him." Diane's eyes were red, exhausted, the eyes of a woman who'd worked a double shift and gotten a call from the hospital instead of coming home to dinner. "We can't afford this, Caleb. We can't afford a hospital bill. We can't afford you losing work. We can't afford—" "I know," Caleb said quietly, looking down at his bruised knuckles. "I know we can't afford anything, but I couldn't just stand there." Diane's face crumpled, and she pulled her son into a careful hug, mindful of his ribs, pressing her lips to the top of his head the way she had when he was small enough to carry. "You're a good boy," she whispered. "Too good for this world sometimes, but you're a good boy." Down the hall in a separate room, Jack Bear Callan was slowly coming back to consciousness, his blood sugar finally stabilized by an IV drip, his massive frame dwarfing the hospital bed. A nurse checked his vitals while a doctor reviewed his chart. "You're a lucky man," the doctor said. Another 10-15 minutes without intervention, and this would have been a very different conversation. Bear's voice came out hoarse, gravel rough. "What happened?" "Last thing I remember is walking into some diner." From what the paramedics gathered, a young man recognized you were going into diabetic shock and got sugar into your system before we arrived. Probably saved your life. Bear blinked, slowly processing. "A kid." "What kid?" "The diner employee. Caleb Whitmore, I believe. He's actually here too, got hurt pretty badly defending you from what the police report says. Some other customers turned violent." Bear's brow furrowed deep, a storm building behind his eyes. "Defending me? From what?" The nurse hesitated, glancing at the doctor before answering. 3 men attacked him while you were unconscious. He wouldn't leave your side. Took quite a beating protecting you." Bear went very still. Something shifted in his expression, not confusion anymore, but a slow, dawning weight, the kind that settles into a man's chest like a stone dropped into still water. "Where is he?" Bear said. It wasn't a question. "I want to see him, now." "Sir, you need rest. Your levels are still—" "I said, where is he?" The doctor exchanged a look with the nurse and finally relented. Down the hall, room 114. But he's resting too, so... Bear was already pulling the IV line, swinging his massive legs off the bed before the doctor could finish the sentence. He found room 114, with effort leaning against the wall for support. His body still weak from the ordeal, but his eyes locked onto the boy sitting on the edge of the bed. Blonde hair, matted with dried blood, one eye swollen nearly shut, ribs wrapped tight, a woman beside him who could only be his mother. Caleb looked up. Recognition flickered across his bruised face. You're awake, thank God. Are you okay? Bear didn't answer right away. He just stood in the doorway staring at this skinny, broken teenager who'd thrown himself between 3 grown men and a dying stranger he'd never met before in his life. You don't even know me. Bear finally said, voice thick with something raw. You needed help, Caleb said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. That's all that mattered. Bear's jaw tightened. His eyes glistened, though he fought it back with the stubbornness of a man who hadn't let himself cry in 20 years. Kid, Bear said slowly, you have no idea what you just started. Diane looked between them confused, sensing something larger moving beneath the surface of this exchange, something she couldn't name yet, but would understand soon enough, something that would change, not just her son's life, but the entire shape of the world around him. Caleb just frowned. Exhausted, bruised, 18 years old, and utterly unaware that the man standing in his hospital doorway wasn't just some biker he'd happened to save. He was about to become a brother to a family bound not by blood, but by something far older, far heavier, and far more permanent than that. And 400 miles away in a clubhouse, Caleb had never heard of a phone, was about to ring. Orchestrated 5,300-word narrative continuation with dialogue-driven pacing and strategic mini-climaxes. Orchestrated 5,300-word narrative continuation with dialogue-driven pacing and strategic mini-climaxes. Bear sat in that hospital chair for the next 2 hours, refusing to leave, refusing to lie back down in his own bed, despite the nurse's repeated warnings about his blood sugar, his exhaustion, his body that had nearly shut down completely just hours earlier. He sat there and watched Caleb sleep, watched the kid's chest rise and fall, in shallow, careful breaths, because every deep one sent pain shooting through his cracked ribs, and something in Bear's chest kept twisting tighter and tighter, like a chain being wound around a gear that hadn't moved in years. Diane finally stepped out to call her sister, voice cracking in the hallway, and that left Bear alone with the boy for the first time. He leaned forward in the chair, elbows on his knees, studying Caleb's bruised face, the way a man studies a debt he knows he can never repay. You hear me, kid, Bear said quietly, though Caleb was asleep and couldn't answer. You don't know what you did. You don't know whose life you just stepped into. He pulled his phone from his vest pocket. The nurses had let him keep it against protocol, because arguing with a 6'4" biker who'd just woken from diabetic shock wasn't worth the hassle, and he dialed a number he knew by heart. It rang twice before a gravelly voice picked up. Bear, where the hell you been? You missed the Thursday ride. Mike, Bear said, and his voice broke slightly on the single syllable, something that hadn't happened in front of another man in over a decade. Mike, I need you to listen to me. I need you to really listen. Iron, Mike Sutter. Chapter President. 31 years. A patched member. A man whose silence carried more weight than most men's shouting went quiet on the other end. He could hear it in Bear's voice. Something had happened. Talk to me, Mike said. I went into shock today. Diabetic shock, bad one, worst I've had in years. Collapsed in some diner off Route 99. Bear's eyes drifted back to Caleb's sleeping face. I would have died, Mike, no question. I was going under, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. You're alive. You're talking to me. So somebody did something right. A kid did something right. Bear's jaw clenched. 18 years old. Skinny little blonde kid works at the diner for nothing, probably hasn't eaten a full meal in God knows how long. Looking at him. He's the only one who knew what was happening to me. Everybody else just stood there, Mike. Just stood there, and watched a man die on the floor. But this kid, he got down on his knees, forced sugar into me, called for help. Saved my life before the paramedics even got there. That's good, Bear. That's real good. You owe the kid a thank you and a hell of a Christmas card. That's not the end of it. Bear's hand tightened around the phone. 3 college boys walked in while I was still down. Big ones, athletes, the kind that think the world owes them something for being able to throw a football. They started mocking me, laughing at me lying there helpless. And this kid that's never met me in his life, doesn't know my name, doesn't know what patch I wear. He stood between them and me, told them to leave me alone. Mike's voice went flat, careful. And they beat him half to death for it, Mike. Bear's voice cracked fully now, raw and furious. 3 grown men against one 18-year-old kid who weighs maybe $140 soaking wet. They threw him into tables, kicked him on the ground, and the whole time he never let go of my wrist, never moved away from me, took every hit they had, rather than step aside and let them get to me while I was unconscious. There was a long silence on the line. Bear could hear Mike breathing, could practically feel the weight settling on the other man's shoulders, 400 miles away. Say that again, Mike said quietly. He shielded me with his own body, Mike, a stranger. 18 years old, broke, beat up worse than I've seen grown men get beat in bar fights, and he did it for somebody he'd known for 90 seconds. Bear looked down at Caleb's battered face, at the swollen eye, the split lip. The way even in sleep the kid's hand was curled like it was still gripping something, still gripping him. I'm looking at him right now. He's in a hospital bed because of what he did for me. Another silence. Then Mike's voice came back lower, now harder, the tone he used when church business turned serious. What's his name? Caleb Whitmore. Where is he? Mercy General off the 99. Mike. Bear leaned forward, voice dropping. I need you to understand something. This isn't gratitude talk. This is the code. You know what we are. You know what loyalty means to this club, what it's cost us, what we've buried for it. This kid showed loyalty to a stranger that some of our own brothers haven't shown each other. He didn't know my name, didn't know what colors I wear, didn't care if I lived or died for his own benefit. He just couldn't watch a man suffer and do nothing. Mike exhaled slowly on the other end, and when he spoke again, there was something almost reverent in his voice. Get some rest, Bear. Don't argue with me. I'm calling church tonight. Mike? I said don't argue with me. A pause. 20 years I've worn this patch. You know how many times I've heard a story like this? Once, maybe twice. This isn't something we let pass, brother. You did your part by staying alive. Let me do mine. The line went dead, and Bear sat back in the chair, exhaling a breath he felt like he'd been holding since the moment he hit the diner floor. 400 miles away in a clubhouse that smelled of motor oil, leather, and 40 years of brotherhood. 14 men sat around a scarred wooden table beneath a wall covered in photographs. Funerals, weddings, rides. Brothers who'd passed and brothers still riding. Iron Mike stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, his weathered face unreadable. I got a call tonight, Mike said, voice carrying easily over the low hum of conversation silencing the room within seconds. From Bear. Every man's attention sharpened. Bear was respected, not just a patch holder, but a man who'd ridden with the club for 18 years, who'd buried 2 brothers and never missed a funeral, who'd never asked the club for a single favor in nearly 2 decades. He went into shock today, Mike continued. Bad one. Would have died on a diner floor off Route 99 if not for a kid working the counter. A few murmurs. Nods. Diabetic shock wasn't unusual for Bear. They all knew his condition, worried about it quietly the way men do when they don't say things out loud. Here's what you don't know, Mike said, raising a hand to cut off the murmuring. While Bear was unconscious, 3 college kids, athletes, the entitled type, started mocking him, humiliating a man who couldn't even defend himself. And the only person in that whole diner who stood up for him was an 18-year-old kid who'd never laid eyes on Bear before in his life. The room went silent. They beat that kid bloody, Mike said, voice tightening with every word. 3 grown men against 1 teenager. He never moved from Bear's side, took the beating with his own body, so they couldn't get to our brother while he was down." A long, heavy quiet settled over the table. Old Pete, the road captain, set down his coffee mug slowly. "He didn't know Bear was one of us," Pete said. "It wasn't a question." "Didn't know his name," Mike confirmed. "Didn't know his patch, didn't know a damn thing, except a man was dying, and 3 idiots were laughing about it. He chose to stand anyway." Another patch member, a younger guy named Diesel, who'd only been riding with the club for 6 years, leaned forward. "What happened to him? Is he okay?" "Hospital," Mike said. "Cracked ribs, busted face, the works. Same hospital as Bear, actually." Pete's weathered hands clenched into fists on the table. "And these college boys, they just walked out. No consequences. Cops are involved. We'll see how far that goes." Mike's eyes swept the room, settling on each man in turn. "But I didn't call church to talk about cops handling this. I called church because that kid did something most of us couldn't claim to have done for our own blood family, let alone a complete stranger. He bled for a man he'd known 90 seconds. That's not kindness, brothers. That's the code. That's the thing we put on our backs and bleed for ourselves." Mike's voice dropped slow and deliberate, every word landing like a hammer strike. "I want to find him. I want every man in this room to understand this isn't about repaying a favor with a handshake and a thank you card. This is about recognizing one of our own values lived out by a kid who's never even sat on a bike. We're going to find Caleb Whitmore, and we're going to make sure he understands exactly what he earned tonight." Around the table, 14 heads nodded slow and solemn. The kind of agreement that didn't need a vote because the answer had already been decided the moment Mike finished the story. "How many riders we talking?" Diesel asked. Mike's eyes were hard as flint. "Every chapter that can make it in 2 days. I'm calling brothers in 3 states." Back at the hospital, Caleb woke groggy and aching, the fluorescent lights too bright, his whole body throbbing in places he hadn't even realized had been hit. Diane was asleep in the chair beside his bed, her head tilted at an angle that would leave her neck stiff for days. Exhaustion finally winning out over worry. Bear was gone discharged that morning against medical advice, the nurse had grumbled, but he'd left something behind a folded napkin on the bedside table with a phone number scrawled in shaky handwriting and 4 words underneath it. "Don't lose this number." Caleb stared at it, confused, his swollen eye making it hard to focus. He had no idea what it meant. No idea that the number belonged to a man who by the next afternoon would be sitting at the head of a table commanding 50 more phone calls across 3 states. He was discharged 2 days later with a prescription for pain medication he could barely afford to fill ribs, wrapped tight, one eye. Still a sickly shade of yellow-green, his jaw aching every time he chewed. Mr. Reyes had called to say his job was waiting whenever he was ready, a small mercy in a world that rarely offered them. But Diane begged him to take time to rest, to let his body heal before going back to 12-hour shifts on his feet. "We can't afford for me not to work," Caleb told her flatly. Sitting at their kitchen table that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old carpet, counting out the $41 he had left after the pharmacy. "Rent's due in 4 days, Mom. I have to go back." "Caleb, I have to," he said again, quieter, like saying it twice would make the math easier. "I'll be careful. I'll take it slow." Diane's eyes welled up, but she didn't argue further. She knew her son. Once Caleb decided something, the conversation was already over. He went back to work 2 days later, moving slower than usual, wincing every time he reached up to grab a coffee pot or bent down to clear a table. But he showed up. He always showed up. That was the one thing in his life nobody could take from him. Not poverty, not a father who'd vanished before Caleb could form a single memory of him, not 3 football players who'd left him bruised on a diner floor. The diner felt different now, though. Quieter. Mr. Reyes kept glancing at him with something between guilt and admiration. The waitress, a woman named Linda, who'd worked there 11 years, brought him a free meal every shift now, without being asked, sliding it across the counter with a soft, "Eat, baby, you need your strength." 3 days after he returned to work, Caleb was walking home along the same broken stretch of road he always walked, no bike anymore since it had been stolen from outside the diner the night of the attack. One more loss stacked on top of everything else when he heard it. A low, distant rumble, like thunder rolling across flat earth. Except the sky was clear and blue, and there wasn't a cloud for miles. He kept walking exhausted, his ribs aching with every step, the late afternoon sun beating down on cracked asphalt that stretched toward nothing but scrub brush and distant hills. The rumble grew louder, closer. Caleb glanced over his shoulder, squinting against the sun. What he saw made his stomach drop straight through the ground. Motorcycles. Dozens of them. Then more. Filling the road behind him in a slow, deliberate formation. Engines growling in unison, like some massive mechanical beast crawling toward him at a walking pace. Leather vests, patches, chrome glinting in the sunlight. They weren't speeding past him, they were surrounding him, closing in from both directions of the empty road, boxing him in with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. Caleb froze. His heart slammed against his bruised ribs hard enough to make him gasp in pain. This is it, he thought, the panic rising fast and hot in his throat. They found out I talked to the cops. They're here to finish what Troy started. He didn't know who they were. Didn't know the difference between rival clubs and outlaws and weekend riders. All he knew was that he was 18 years old alone on an empty road, his body still healing from the last beating, and now surrounded by what looked like an army of leather and steel. The bikes slowed, then stopped, engines idling in a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the asphalt itself. Caleb's eyes darted from face to face, hardened, weathered, unreadable men staring back at him in total silence. 20 bikes. Then he counted more behind them. 30. 50. The number kept climbing the further he looked, stretching back down the road until it disappeared around the bend. Please, Caleb said, voice shaking, raising both hands, slowly palms out. I don't have anything. I don't know what you want, but I don't have anything. Nobody answered. Nobody moved. The silence stretched so long that Caleb felt his pulse hammering in his ears, certain he was about to die on this empty road, and nobody would even find his body until morning. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the formation, the engines began to part. Bikes rolling slowly aside, clearing a path, and a single rider came forward. Caleb's breath caught. It was him, the biker from the diner. A live, healthy color back in his face, riding a massive black Harley that rumbled like distant thunder. Bear pulled to a stop directly in front of Caleb and killed the engine, the sudden silence almost deafening after the wall of noise. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Caleb just stared, his legs trembling, unsure if relief or fresh terror was the right response. Bear swung off the bike slowly, his massive frame towering over Caleb even more than it had in the diner. And for one heart-stopping second, Caleb genuinely believed he was about to be punished for something, for getting involved, for calling attention, for surviving, when he should have just stayed out of it. Then Bear took off his sunglasses, and Caleb saw his eyes were wet. "You saved my life, kid." Bear said, his voice rough and thick with something Caleb had never heard directed at him before, not from a teacher, not from an employer, certainly not from his absent father. "From now on, you are family." Caleb's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His mind couldn't process the sentence fast enough, couldn't reconcile the wall of motorcycles surrounding him with the words this man had just spoken. I don't understand," Caleb finally managed, his voice cracking. "Family, I don't even know you. I don't know any of you." "That's exactly why this matters," Bear said, stepping closer, placing one enormous hand on Caleb's shoulder, gentle despite its size, the same hand that could probably crush bone without effort. "You didn't help me because you knew me. You didn't help me because you owed me something. You got down on the floor of that diner and saved a stranger's life, and when those 3 cowards came after me while I couldn't defend myself, you took the beating instead of stepping aside. You don't know what that means to people like us." Behind Bear, a man with silver hair and a weathered, scarred face rode forward. Iron Mike, though Caleb still didn't know his name yet, and stopped his bike beside Bear's. "My name's Mike," he said, voice carrying easily across the silent road. "I'm the president of this chapter. You understand what that means?" Caleb shook his head slowly, still trembling, still trying to process the sheer number of people surrounding him. It means every single person you see on this road answers to me when it comes to club business, Mike said. And I'm telling you, son, what you did for Bear, that's not something we forget. That's not something we walk away from. We don't measure loyalty by blood out here. We measure it by what a man's willing to bleed for. You bled for a stranger. That makes you one of us, whether you understand it yet or not. Caleb's eyes filled with tears. He hadn't expected the emotion of the last week. The fear, the pain, the exhaustion, the bone-deep loneliness of being a poor kid nobody noticed in a world that had never once stepped up for him, finally cracking through the surface he'd kept tightly sealed since the hospital. His voice broke. I just couldn't let him die, that's all. I didn't think about anything else. That's the whole point, Bear said, squeezing his shoulder. You didn't think about it. You just did it. That's the difference between a good man and everybody else in this world, kid. Good men don't calculate. They just move. Mike dismounted slowly, his boots crunching against the gravel shoulder of the road, and walked toward Caleb with the deliberate, measured pace of a man who'd commanded respect in rooms far more dangerous than this one. Here's what's happening, Mike said. You're hurt. You're broke. I can see that just looking at you, the way your clothes hang off you, the way you're still favoring those ribs. That ends today. We take care of our own, and as of right now, you're our own. I can't accept. You don't have a choice, Mike said, not unkindly, almost amused. That's not how this works. We're not asking permission, kid. We're telling you what's true. You stood up when nobody else would. Now we're standing up for you. That's the deal. That's always been the deal. Behind them, the wall of bikers began revving their engines in a slow rolling wave, not threatening this time, but celebratory. A deep rumbling roar that rolled down the empty road like applause from an audience of 50 men who'd never spoken a word to Caleb in his life, but already considered him theirs. Caleb stood frozen in the middle of it, tears streaking down his bruised face, utterly overwhelmed, utterly unprepared for the seismic shift happening in real time beneath his feet. 3 weeks ago, he'd been invisible. A kid nobody saw working a dead-end job to keep his mother's lights on, eating free lunch in shame, watching his classmates disappear into colleges he could never afford while he disappeared into shifts at a roadside diner. Now he was standing in the middle of an empty road surrounded by 50 motorcycles being told by a stranger that he had a family, now a family bigger, louder, and more fiercely protective than anything he'd ever imagined. Get on, Bear said, gesturing toward an empty seat behind him on the bike. We're taking you home, properly this time. Caleb hesitated, glancing back down the long empty road toward his mother's apartment. Then back at the wall of riders, waiting patiently, engines idling. My mom, he said weakly. She doesn't even know where I am. She's gonna panic. We already called her, Mike said simply. Told her you'd be home safe, told her who we were. She cried for 10 minutes straight before she could even speak, far as Diesel tells it. Caleb's chest tightened at the thought of his mother on the other end of that phone call, terrified and confused, hearing strangers tell her that her son had somehow earned the protection of an entire motorcycle club in the span of one diner shift. He climbed onto the back of Bear's bike with trembling hands, gripping the sides of the seat like his life depended on it, which in a strange and overwhelming way it now did. The engine roared to life beneath him, and the procession began to move 50 motorcycles rolling forward in formation down the cracked, empty stretch of Route 99, carrying an 18-year-old boy who'd walked out of his shift that morning, believing himself completely alone in the world. He wasn't alone anymore. He didn't fully understand yet what that meant, what it would cost, what it would protect him from, how violently the next few weeks would test the bond formed in that single act of courage on a diner floor. But as the wind whipped against his bruised face and the thunder of engines surrounded him on every side, Caleb Whitmore felt something he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. He felt safe. Word of what happened spread through their small town faster than anyone could have predicted. By the time Caleb arrived back at his apartment complex, flanked by a literal motorcade of Hell's Angels that drew every neighbor out onto their porches in stunned disbelief, the story had already taken on a life of its own, twisted and exaggerated through a dozen retellings before it ever reached its destination. Diane stood in the parking lot, hand pressed over her mouth, watching her son dismount from the back of a stranger's motorcycle surrounded by what looked like an entire army of bikers. Tears streamed down her face before he'd even taken 3 steps toward her. "Caleb," she breathed, pulling him into a hug so tight it pressed against his still healing ribs, and for once he didn't complain about the pain. How they told me on the phone, but I didn't. I couldn't believe. It's true, Mom," Caleb said into her shoulder, his voice thick. "All of it." Mike approached them slowly, removing his sunglasses again, extending a weathered hand toward Diane with the kind of formal respect that surprised her more than the leather vest or the patches. "Ma'am," Mike said, "your son's a remarkable young man. I know this is a lot to take in all at once, and I know it probably looks frightening 50 strangers showing up on motorcycles. But I promise you, from this day forward, your boy has people watching out for him. People who won't let what happened in that diner happen to him again." Diane wiped at her eyes, looking between Mike's weathered, sincere face and her son's bruised one, trying to process the sheer magnitude of what was unfolding in front of her modest apartment building. "Why?" she finally asked, voice trembling. "Why would you do all this for him? You don't even know us." Mike's eyes softened, and for a moment the hard, commanding presence cracked just slightly, revealing something gentler underneath. "Because 18 years ago, somebody did something similar for me," Mike said quietly. "And I never forgot it. Loyalty like your son showed, it's rare, ma'am. Rarer than most people understand. When we find it, we protect it. That's not charity. That's not pity. That's just how we're built." Diane's eyes welled up again, and she nodded slowly, unable to fully articulate the gratitude and disbelief tangled together in her chest. Behind them, Bear approached, pulling something from his vest pocket, an envelope thick folded twice. He pressed it into Caleb's hands gently. "What's this?" Caleb asked, staring down at it. "Open it later," Bear said. "It's not charity either. Think of it as back pay, for services rendered." Caleb opened his mouth to protest, but Bear shook his head firmly, cutting him off before he could even start. "Don't," Bear said. "Don't you dare try to give that back. You earned every cent of it bleeding on a diner floor for a man you'd never met. Let us do this. Let us take care of you the way you took care of me." Caleb's throat tightened, and he nodded silently, clutching the envelope against his chest like it might disappear if he loosened his grip. As the sun began sinking lower over the apartment complex, painting the sky in deep oranges and reds, the bikers slowly began starting their engines again, preparing to head back toward wherever they'd come from. But before Bear swung his leg back over his bike, he turned to Caleb one final time. His expression suddenly serious, the warmth replaced by something harder, more protective. "Listen to me, kid," Bear said, lowering his voice so only Caleb and Diane could hear. "Those boys who did this to you, Troy Dawson and his friends, they're not done. Boys like that, when they get humiliated, when they get exposed for the cowards they are, they don't slink away quiet. They come back angrier. They come back looking to prove something." Caleb's stomach tightened. "What do I do if they come back?" Bear's eyes were steady, unflinching. "You don't do anything. You let us handle it. You hear me? Anything happens, anything at all, you call that number I gave you. Day or night, doesn't matter. We'll be there before the cops even get the call." "I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," Mike interrupted, walking back over his expression equally hard. "We're telling. This is how it works now. You're one of us, Caleb, and we don't let our own get hurt twice for the same act of kindness." The engines roared back to life, one by one, the deafening rumble swallowing the quiet evening air, and slowly the procession pulled away from the apartment complex, leaving Caleb and Diane standing alone in the parking lot, watching 50 taillights disappear down the darkening road. Diane turned to her son, still holding the thick envelope against his chest, his bruised face illuminated by the dying light of sunset. "Open it," she whispered. Caleb's hands trembled as he tore the envelope open, and his breath caught hard in his throat at what he found inside, enough cash to cover not just this month's rent, but the next several, along with a folded note in Bear's rough handwriting. "This isn't payment. This is family taking care of family. Don't argue, just live." Bear. Caleb sank down onto the curb outside their apartment. The weight of everything finally crashing down on him all at once. The violence, the fear, the exhaustion, and now this overwhelming, almost unbearable kindness from strangers who'd had every reason to simply ride away and forget his name. He didn't know it yet. Sitting there in the fading light with his mother's hand resting gently on his shoulder. But somewhere across town, Troy Dawson was already telling his father a very different version of events. One where Caleb was the aggressor, where the bikers were a gang of criminals threatening innocent college students, where the real victim wore a university hoodie and came from a family with the kind of money and connections that could turn lies into headlines. And Troy's father wasn't just angry, he was already making calls. Orchestrated narrative continuation, void dialogue. Heavy storytelling, revenge arc, via multiple mini-climaxes. Orchestrated narrative continuation, void dialogue, heavy storytelling, revenge arc, via multiple mini-climaxes. Richard Dawson sat behind a mahogany desk in his office on the top floor of Dawson Development, listening to his son recount the story for the third time, each version slightly more polished than the last. Each version painting Troy as the wronged party in a scenario that had actually begun with him kicking an unconscious man's helper while he lay defenseless on a diner floor. "So you're telling me," Richard said, slowly steepling his fingers, "that you were just standing there minding your own business and this kid attacked you?" "Pretty much, Dad," Troy said, leaning back in the leather chair across the desk, not quite meeting his father's eyes. "He came at us out of nowhere, started yelling, getting in our faces. We were just trying to defuse the situation. And the bikers showed up after. Some gang surrounded our truck on the way out of the parking lot. Scared the hell out of us, honestly. Thought they were going to kill us." Richard studied his son for a long moment, the silence stretching uncomfortably, and Troy felt a familiar flicker of unease. The same feeling he'd had as a child, whenever his father suspected him of lying, but hadn't decided yet whether it was worth confronting. "Diner has cameras, Troy," Richard said finally, voice flat. "I already had someone pull the footage before you walked through that door tonight." Troy's face drained of color. "Dad, I can explain." "You don't need to explain anything to me," Richard said, standing slowly walking to the window that overlooked half the city he'd spent 30 years quietly buying up piece by piece. "I don't care what actually happened in that diner. I care about what happens next. And what happens next depends entirely on how this story gets told publicly." "So you're not mad?" Richard turned back to face his son, and the look in his eyes wasn't anger. It was something colder, more calculating. "I'm furious. Not because you beat up some diner busboy. Because you were stupid enough to do it in front of cameras, in front of witnesses, and now apparently in front of an entire motorcycle club that's decided to adopt the kid as their personal mascot. That's a liability, Troy. That's a problem I now have to fix." "What's the play then?" Troy asked, some of his usual swagger returning now that the conversation had shifted from punishment to strategy. Richard sat back down, already reaching for his phone. "The play is simple. We control the narrative before anyone else does. We paint this Whitmore kid as unstable, dangerous, affiliated with a known criminal organization. We make the bikers the story, not you. Outlaw gang terrorizes local family, that sort of thing. Reporters eat that up. And if it doesn't work..." Richard's smile was thin, humorless. "Then we find other ways. I didn't build this company by accepting the first answer I got. I built it by making sure the answer was always whatever I needed it to be." 2 days later, Caleb stood behind the counter at the diner, his ribs still wrapped tight, the bruising around his eye finally fading from deep purple to a sickly yellow-green when Mr. Reyes called him into the back office, face pale and uncertain. "Caleb, you need to see this," he said, turning his laptop screen around. A local news segment played the anchor's voice carefully neutral, while the chyron beneath her read, "Teen's violent outburst draws outlaw biker gang to local diner." Caleb's stomach dropped. The segment featured a heavily edited clip just seconds carefully cropped to remove all context, showing Caleb shoving past Troy to reach Bear, the footage cut precisely to make it look like Caleb had initiated the confrontation. A local concerned citizen, Richard Dawson's assistant, though Caleb had no way of knowing that, gave a statement expressing fear about gang activity creeping into their quiet community. "This is a lie," Caleb said, his hands trembling as he stared at the screen. "This isn't what happened. I was helping him. I never touched Troy first. He attacked me." "I know, son," Mr. Reyes said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I know what I saw, but people watching this on TV don't know that." Caleb's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from an unknown number, the number Bear had given him. Saw the news. "Don't say a word to anyone. Mike's already handling it. Sit tight." Caleb stared at the message, his mind racing. Handling it how he wondered, a flicker of unease curling in his stomach. He didn't want violence. He didn't want anyone else getting hurt because of what had happened to him. He texted back, fingers shaking. "Please don't do anything that gets people hurt. I just want this to go away." The reply came almost instantly. "Nobody's getting hurt. Mike doesn't fight dirty money with fists. He fights it with paper. Trust him." Caleb didn't fully understand what that meant, but something in the certainty of the message eased the knot in his chest just slightly. 400 miles away, in a much less polished office than Richard Dawson's, a cramped back room of the clubhouse walls covered in maps and photographs instead of expensive art. Iron Mike sat across from a woman named Sandra Cole, a private investigator the club had used for years. Someone whose loyalty had been earned through favors that went back over a decade. "Richard Dawson," Mike said, sliding a manila folder across the table. "Local developer county's golden boy donates to half the politicians in this district. I want everything. Every permit he's ever filed, every contractor he's ever paid, every inspector he's ever had lunch with." Sandra flipped open the folder, scanning the preliminary notes Mike had already compiled. Newspaper clippings, public records, the bones of a much larger investigation waiting to be built. "This is going to take some digging, Mike. Guys like this, they're careful. They bury things deep. I've got time," Mike said. "And I've got patience. Dawson's already started a smear campaign against a kid who saved one of my brother's lives. I don't fight a man like that with my fists, Sandra. I fight him with what he's actually scared of: exposure. Men like Dawson don't fear bikers. They fear headlines that say corruption instead of philanthropist." "What am I looking for specifically?" "Bribery, zoning violations, inspection fraud, something that ties his money to favors he's bought from city officials. A man doesn't get as rich as Richard Dawson in a town this small without cutting corners somewhere. Find where he cut them." Sandra nodded, slowly closing the folder. "Give me 2 weeks." "You've got one," Mike said, standing. "Dawson's already moving. We need to move faster." That same evening, Troy Dawson and his 2 friends sat in a parking lot outside a gas station, restless, agitated, fueled by the kind of arrogance that only grows more dangerous when it's been publicly humiliated and privately validated by a father who'd just spent 2 days teaching him how to lie convincingly to reporters. "This isn't over," Troy said, gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white. "That kid made me look weak in front of everybody. My dad's pulling strings to clean it up, but that doesn't fix what happened. People at school are already talking." "What do you want to do?" Des asked from the passenger seat. "Bikers are watching him now, man. You saw how many showed up. They can't watch him 24/7, Troy said, eyes narrowing. "He still works the same shifts, still walks the same road home. We just need to catch him when they're not around." "Troy, man, I don't know," the third boy, Marcus, said uneasily from the back seat. "This is getting out of hand. We already got cops involved. If we go after him again—" "Nobody's going after anybody with their fists," Troy snapped. "I'm not stupid enough to give them another video. We're smarter than that. We ruin him a different way, cost him his job, cost him everything. Let's see how loyal his biker family stays when he's got nothing left to protect." Marcus exchanged a worried glance with Des, but said nothing further, the silence in the car settling like a held breath. 3 days passed in a strange, uneasy quiet. Caleb went to work, came home, helped his mother with bills, now slightly easier to manage thanks to Bear's envelope, and tried his best to convince himself the danger had passed. But the unease never fully left him, a low, persistent hum beneath every normal moment, the kind of fear that lingers in your shoulders even when nothing's actively threatening you. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, Mr. Reyes called him into the office again, this time his expression grim in a different way. "Caleb, I need to talk to you about something difficult," he said, not meeting Caleb's eyes. "What's wrong?" "The owner, the actual owner of this diner, not me. I just manage it. He got a call from the county this morning. Health inspector wants to do a full review next week, out of nowhere. No complaints filed, no reason given." Caleb's stomach tightened. "That's not normal, is it?" "No," Mr. Reyes said quietly. "It's not. And I got a call an hour ago from corporate asking about, and I'm quoting here, concerns about an employee's affiliation with a criminal organization potentially endangering customer safety." Caleb's blood ran cold. "They're trying to get me fired." "I think somebody with money is trying to get you fired," Mr. Reyes corrected gently. "I don't believe a word of it, son. I told corporate exactly that. But I need you to understand, if this inspection finds anything, even something small, they might use it as an excuse." Caleb sank into the chair across from him, his hands trembling slightly. "It's Troy's father, isn't it? He's coming after my job because he can't get to me any other way." Mr. Reyes didn't answer, but the look on his face confirmed everything Caleb already suspected. That night, Caleb told Bear everything over the phone, his voice tight with frustration and fear. "They're trying to take my job, Bear. The one thing keeping food on our table, and they're trying to use lies and inspections to destroy it, because Troy's dad has money and I don't." "Listen to me," Bear said, his voice steady, grounding. "This is exactly the kind of fight Mike's already preparing for. You let the money fight money. You keep showing up to work, keep your head down, keep doing exactly what you've always done. Let us handle what's happening in the background. You hear me?" "I don't want anyone else getting hurt because of me," Caleb said, voice breaking slightly. "Nobody's getting hurt," Bear said firmly. "Mike doesn't believe in violence as the first answer. He believes in patience and proof, and making sure the truth outlasts the lie. You just need to trust us a little longer." A week later, the inspection happened. Caleb spent the entire shift with his stomach in knots, watching a stern-faced inspector move through the kitchen with a clipboard scribbling notes, checking temperatures, examining every surface with the kind of scrutiny that felt less like routine and more like a hunt for something specific. But the diner passed clean. Spotless. In fact, Mr. Reyes had spent the entire week before scrubbing every inch of the kitchen himself, terrified of giving Dawson's people any excuse at all. The corporate complaint about Caleb's criminal affiliation went nowhere too, mostly because Mr. Reyes had submitted a formal statement alongside several witness accounts from the diner's regular customers, all confirming that Caleb had done nothing but defend an innocent man from an unprovoked attack. But the relief was short-lived. 3 days after the failed inspection, Caleb was walking home from his shift alone. The road quiet. No bikers in sight, since they couldn't realistically shadow him every single hour of every single day when a familiar truck pulled up alongside him, slowing to match his pace. Troy leaned out the passenger window, smirking. "Inspection didn't work, huh? Guess we'll just have to get creative." Caleb kept walking, refusing to look over, his pulse hammering. "Leave me alone, Troy." "Or what?" Troy laughed. "Your biker buddy's gonna come save you. They're not here right now, are they?" Caleb's hand instinctively moved toward his pocket, toward the phone, with Bear's number saved, but before he could pull it out, the truck suddenly sped up and swerved sharply toward the shoulder of the road, forcing Caleb to leap back into the brush to avoid being clipped. "Just a warning," Troy shouted out the window as the truck peeled away, laughter trailing behind it. "Next time we won't miss." Caleb stood there, heart pounding, scraped from the fall, into the brush, fumbling for his phone with shaking hands. He dialed Bear's number immediately. "They just tried to run me off the road," Caleb said the second Bear picked up, his voice cracking with adrenaline and fear. "Troy and his friends. They almost hit me." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by a long, dangerous silence. "Where are you right now?" Bear said, voice gone completely flat, completely controlled in a way that somehow felt more frightening than if he'd shouted. "Route 99 near the old gas station," Caleb said. "I'm okay, I'm shaken up." "Stay exactly where you are. Don't move. I'm calling it in right now." Within 20 minutes, far faster than Caleb thought possible, the low rumble of motorcycles filled the air again, and this time it wasn't 50 bikes. It was closer to 80 filling the empty road in a procession that made the ground itself seem to tremble. Bear arrived first, practically leaping off his bike before it had fully stopped, pulling Caleb into a crushing hug that nearly knocked the wind out of him, checking him over with frantic hands like he expected to find broken bones. "I'm fine," Caleb said, voice shaky but steady. "Really, they just scared me." "They tried to hit you with a vehicle," Mike said, dismounting slowly, his expression carved from granite. "That's not a scare tactic anymore, son. That's attempted vehicular assault." "I know who did it," Caleb said. "Troy Dawson. He had 2 friends in the truck with him." Mike's jaw tightened, and he exchanged a long look with Bear, something unspoken passing between them, the look of 2 men who'd spent years navigating exactly this kind of escalation, and knew precisely how dangerous the next few weeks could become if they didn't manage it carefully. "This needs to go to the police," Mike said finally. "Formally, with a report. We're not handling this with our own hands, not when there's a clear paper trail building against this family already." "You think the cops will actually do something?" Caleb asked, doubt creeping into his voice. "His dad practically owns half this county." "His dad's about to find out money doesn't buy everything." Mike said, something cold and certain in his voice. "Sandra's already found enough to make Richard Dawson very uncomfortable. We were planning to build the case bigger. But if his son's escalating to attempted assault, we're not waiting anymore." That night back at the clubhouse, Sandra Cole spread a series of documents across the table in front of Mike, her expression triumphant despite the late hour. "You were right," she said. "Dawson's been paying off a county building inspector for years, falsifying safety reports on at least 6 different properties, cutting corners on fire code compliance to save money on construction costs. I've got bank records showing payments to the inspector's personal account disguised as consulting fees. I've also got texts between Dawson and a city councilman discussing zoning variance approvals in exchange for campaign contributions that were never properly disclosed." Mike's eyes scanned the document slowly, the weight of what he was looking at settling into something grim and satisfied. "This is enough to bury him." "More than enough," Sandra confirmed. "This isn't a parking ticket, Mike. This is fraud, bribery, falsified safety inspections that could have gotten people killed if a building ever failed. This is the kind of thing that ends careers and starts federal investigations." "Get this to the right reporter," Mike said. "Someone who can't be bought off someone who'll run with it before Dawson has time to bury it again. And get a copy to the DA's office directly so there's no chance of it disappearing." "Already on it," Sandra said. "Give it 48 hours. This story's about to break wide open." The truck incident report Caleb filed with the local police triggered something neither he nor the club fully anticipated. An officer named Detective Ruiz, sharp-eyed and unimpressed by Dawson's reputation, took the case seriously from the first interview, cross-referencing it with the original diner assault report, still sitting open and unresolved. 2 days later, Detective Ruiz called Caleb in for a follow-up, and what she told him made his stomach twist with something between vindication and disbelief. "We pulled traffic camera footage from the gas station near where the incident occurred," Ruiz said, sliding a printed still across her desk. "Confirms your account completely. Troy Dawson's vehicle swerving directly at you, no question about intent." "So what happens now?" Caleb asked. "Now we add attempted assault with a deadly weapon. The vehicle counts to the existing charges from the diner incident," Ruiz said. "And given the pattern of escalation, I'm recommending a restraining order be filed immediately on top of criminal charges." Caleb felt something loosen in his chest for the first time in weeks. Not full relief. Not yet. But the first solid sign that the truth might actually matter, that the system might actually work the way it was supposed to. But that same afternoon, as Caleb left the police station, His phone buzzed with a text from Mike that made his relief curdle instantly into something far more uneasy. Stories about to break on Dawson Development. It's bigger than we thought. Brace yourself, things are about to get loud. The next morning, Caleb sat at the kitchen table with his mother, both of them staring at the local news website on his cracked phone screen, watching the headline materialize in real time. Developer Richard Dawson, under investigation for bribery, falsified safety inspections across multiple properties. "Oh my God," Diane whispered, scrolling through the article, her eyes widening with each paragraph. "Caleb, this is everywhere. Every news outlet in the county is running this." Caleb read in stunned silence as the article detailed years of corruption, falsified fire inspections on apartment complexes that housed hundreds of families, bribes disguised as consulting fees, zoning approvals bought through undisclosed campaign contributions. The investigation, the article noted, had been triggered by an anonymous tip and corroborating documentation submitted to both the district attorney's office and a local investigative journalist simultaneously. His phone rang. Bear's number. "You seeing this?" Bear asked, and Caleb could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "I'm seeing it," Caleb said, still in disbelief. "Mike did this." "Mike's people did this," Bear corrected. "Took 2 weeks of digging, but Dawson's been cutting corners on safety inspections for years to line his own pockets. People could have died in buildings he certified as safe when they weren't. This isn't revenge, kid. This is justice that was already overdue. We just gave it a push." Caleb's mind raced, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. A man who'd seemed untouchable just weeks ago. A man with enough money and power to manipulate the news and pressure a diner into firing him, now facing a criminal investigation that was unraveling everything he'd built. "What about Troy?" Caleb asked. "Is this going to make things worse? Is he going to come after me harder now that his dad's exposed?" There was a brief pause on the line. "Possible," Bear admitted. "Cornered animals get desperate, kid. That's exactly why we're not backing off watching you. If anything, we're tightening it. Mike's already arranging for someone to be near you at all times until the restraining order's processed and Troy's formally charged." Caleb closed his eyes, exhaling slowly, the whiplash of the last 24 hours, leaving him emotionally raw. "I just wanted to help someone in a diner," he said quietly. "I didn't think it would turn into all of this." "That's how it always starts," Bear said, his voice softening. "One small act of decency in a world that doesn't expect it from anybody anymore. You didn't ask for any of this, Caleb, but you earned it the second you got down on that floor and refused to let me die alone." Die. Richard Dawson sat in his office that same afternoon, the phone in his hand ringing uselessly as call after call from panicked board members, lawyers, and city officials flooded in, each one more frantic than the last. His face had gone pale, his usual composed arrogance completely stripped away, replaced by the desperate calculations of a man watching everything he'd spent 30 years building collapse in the span of a single news cycle. Troy burst into the office without knocking, his face a mixture of fear and fury. "Dad, what is happening? People at school are saying you're going to prison." "Sit down!" Richard's snapped voice sharp with barely controlled panic. "I need to think. This is because of that kid, isn't it?" Troy's voice rose, cracking with rage. "Him and his biker friends did this to us. Troy, I'm going to fix this," Troy said, turning toward the door, fury overriding every shred of caution he might have had left. "I'm going to make sure that kid regrets ever stepping foot in that diner." "Troy, sit down." Richard's voice cracked like a whip, stopping his son mid-stride. "You will do nothing. Do you understand me? Nothing. We are facing federal charges. The last thing this family needs is you adding assault charges on top of everything else. So we just let him win," Troy demanded, eyes blazing. "Let some nobody from a diner destroy everything we've built and just walk away clean." Richard stared at his son for a long, heavy moment. Something cold and desperate flickering behind his eyes, the look of a drowning man searching for anything solid to grab onto, even if it meant pulling someone else down with him. "No," Richard said slowly, his voice dropping to something dangerous and quiet. "We're not letting anyone walk away clean, but we're going to be smarter about how we handle this. There's still time to fix this, Troy. There's still a way to make sure that kid pays for what he's done to this family." Troy's expression shifted from fury to something colder, more calculating, mirroring the dangerous resolve forming behind his father's eyes. Neither of them noticed the conversation was about to push them past the point where lawyers and reputation management could save them, past the point where anything short of complete and total reckoning would be enough to satisfy what was coming. Because 400 miles away in a clubhouse filled with men who'd spent their entire lives understanding exactly what loyalty cost and exactly what it protected. Iron Mike was already 3 steps ahead, watching the Dawson family's desperation unfold in real time, and preparing for the one thing he knew men like Richard Dawson always did when cornered. They got reckless, and reckless men made mistakes that could never be undone. Orchestrated seamless narrative continuation with dramatic pacing and emotional depth. Orchestrated seamless narrative continuation with dramatic pacing and emotional depth. Detective Ruiz called Caleb in again on a Monday morning, her expression carrying a weight that made his stomach tighten before she even said a word. "The restraining order's been processed," she said, sliding the paperwork across her desk. "Troy Dawson is legally required to stay 500 feet away from you at all times. Any violation is an automatic arrest." "Thank you," Caleb said, exhaling a breath he felt like he'd been holding for days. "There's something else," Ruiz continued, her tone shifting careful. "We've gotten a report. Anonymous tip came through the department's tip line last night, claiming you've been harassing the Dawson family, showing up near their property making threats." Caleb's mouth fell open. "That's not I haven't been anywhere near them. I don't even know where they live." "I believe you," Ruiz said. "The timestamp on the tip doesn't match any cell tower data near their residence, pinging your number, and frankly, the wording sounds exactly like someone trying to manufacture a counter-narrative. But I need you to be careful, Caleb. Document everything. Where you are, when, who you're with. If this escalates into a he said she said situation, I want you covered." Caleb left the station with a knot of dread settling deep in his chest, the kind that didn't loosen no matter how many times he told himself the truth was on his side. He called Bear from the parking lot, voice tight. "They're trying to flip it," Caleb said. "Make it look like I'm the one harassing them now." "Of course they are," Bear said grimly. "Desperate people don't stop lying, kid. They just get more creative with it. You did the right thing telling Ruiz. Keep that up. Document everything like she said. We'll back you on our end, too." That evening, walking home from his shift, Caleb noticed a car parked across the street from the diner. Not Troy's truck. Something unfamiliar. Dark sedan windows tinted. It idled there for nearly 20 minutes before pulling away the moment Caleb glanced toward it twice. He texted Bear immediately, hands trembling slightly. "Someone's been watching the diner. Dark sedan just left. Didn't get the plate. Got it. We'll have eyes on you from now until this blows over. Don't walk alone anymore. One of us will be parked near the diner every shift starting tomorrow." True to his word, the next morning, a biker named Diesel sat parked outside the diner in an old pickup truck, nursing a coffee, watching the lot with the patient stillness of a man who'd done exactly this kind of work for the club more times than he could count. Caleb caught his eye through the window once, and Diesel gave him a single solemn nod, a silent promise that didn't need words. It helped knowing someone was watching, but it didn't erase the fear coiled tight in Caleb's chest every time he heard an unfamiliar engine, every time a shadow crossed too close behind him on the street. 3 days later, the fear stopped being abstract. Caleb was closing up the diner alone. Mr. Reyes had left early for a doctor's appointment, and the evening crew had already clocked out when he stepped outside into the parking lot and found Troy Dawson standing directly beside his car. Alone. No friends this time, his face haggard in a way Caleb hadn't seen before. Every instinct told Caleb to turn back inside, to call for help immediately. But something about Troy's posture, slumped exhausted. None of the usual swagger made him hesitate. "You're not supposed to be here," Caleb said carefully, keeping his distance, his hand already moving toward his phone. "There's a restraining order. You need to leave." "I know," Troy said, voice strangely flat. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just..." He laughed bitterly, running a hand through his hair. Everything's falling apart, man. My dad's facing federal charges. Our house got served papers yesterday. My scholarship's under review because of the assault charges. You have any idea what you've done to my entire life? What I've done? Caleb's voice sharpened despite his fear. You beat me unconscious on a diner floor for trying to save a dying man's life, Troy. You tried to run me off the road with your truck. Whatever's happening to you now, you did that to yourself. Troy's jaw tightened, something dangerous flickering behind his exhausted eyes. You think this is justice? You think ruining my entire family is some kind of righteous payback? I never wanted any of this, Caleb said, voice shaking now. Adrenaline finally catching up to the fear he'd been suppressing. I just wanted to help someone. You're the one who turned it into all of this. For a moment, Troy just stared at him, something unreadable crossing his face. Grief, maybe, or the early stages of a desperation that hadn't yet decided what shape it would take. Then his expression hardened back into something colder. You're gonna regret this, Troy said quietly, no longer shouting, which somehow made it more frightening. Not today. Not with your biker friends watching every move you make. But this isn't over, Caleb, not even close. He turned and walked to his car, and Caleb stood frozen in the parking lot watching him drive away, his whole body trembling with adrenaline that had nowhere left to go. He called Detective Ruiz, first reporting the restraining order violation immediately. Then he called Bear, his voice cracking as he relayed everything. He just left. Didn't touch you, Bear asked, voice tight with controlled fury. He just talked, Caleb said. But Bear, the way he said it, it didn't feel like an empty threat. It felt like he's planning something. Diesel was parked outside the whole time, Bear said. He saw the car, saw Troy approach, was already moving toward you when Troy left. We've got the whole thing on dash cam too. Adds to the restraining order violation, gives Ruiz exactly what she needs to get a warrant out immediately. That's good? Caleb said, though the relief felt thin, stretched too tight over the fear still hammering in his chest. But Bear, what if he's not planning to come at me again? What if he's planning something worse? There was a pause on the line, heavy and considering. What makes you think that? The way he looked, Caleb said slowly, trying to find words for something that felt more like instinct than logic. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked like someone who'd already decided something and was past the point of caring what happened to him for it. That instinct proved correct faster than anyone expected. 2 days later, Iron Mike received a call from Sandra Cole that changed the entire shape of the conflict. Mike, you need to hear this, Sandra said, her voice uncharacteristically urgent. I've been monitoring financial activity around the Dawson investigation like you asked. Richard Dawson liquidated a significant chunk of assets yesterday, moved money into offshore accounts, the kind of thing people do when they're planning to disappear before charges get formally filed. He's running, Mike said. Maybe. But there's something else. Sandra's voice tightened. I also flagged a firearms purchase under Troy Dawson's name 3 days ago. Handgun background check cleared because he doesn't have a record, not yet anyway, since the assault charges haven't gone to trial. Mike's blood went cold. When did this happen? Day before yesterday. Same day, according to the timeline you gave me, that he showed up at the diner violating the restraining order. Mike was already moving, grabbing his vest off the back of a chair, shouting across the clubhouse for Bear and Diesel before he'd even hung up the phone. Get every available man you can reach right now. Caleb's in danger. Real danger, not posturing. Troy bought a gun. The words landed like a physical blow across the room. Within minutes, phones were ringing throughout 3 different chapters, men dropping whatever they were doing. Jobs, dinners, sleep, and moving toward bikes parked in driveways and garages across the county. Bear called Caleb immediately, his voice carrying an urgency that made Caleb's stomach drop before Bear even finished the sentence. Where are you right now? Home, Caleb said, confused by the panic in Bear's voice. Why, what's wrong? Stay there. Lock every door, every window. Don't open the door for anyone except me or Mike. You understand. Anyone. Bear, you're scaring me. What's happening? Troy bought a gun 3 days ago. Bear said bluntly, deciding the truth was safer than letting Caleb's imagination run wilder than reality. We don't know his plan yet, but we're not taking chances. I'm 15 minutes out. Diesel's already outside your building. Caleb's hands shook as he locked the front door, then the windows, his mother watching with growing alarm from the kitchen table. What's going on? Diane asked, rising to her feet. Caleb talked to me. Troy bought a gun, Caleb said, his voice barely above a whisper, the words feeling unreal even as he spoke them. Bear thinks he might be planning something. Diane's face went white. She crossed the room, instinctively pulling Caleb into her arms the way she had when he was small, when the world's dangers were things she could shield him from with nothing more than her own body standing between him and harm. We are not losing you, she said fiercely, her voice trembling but resolute. Not after everything. Not to that boy. Not to anyone. The next 48 hours stretched into something unbearable. A tense, watchful silence punctuated by the low rumble of motorcycles patrolling the streets around Caleb's apartment, in rotating shifts, Mike coordinating with Detective Ruiz directly. Now the police department finally taking the threat seriously enough to add patrol cars to the same routes. Caleb didn't go to work those 2 days. Mr. Reyes insisted, refusing to let him risk it covering his shifts personally despite his own health concerns. Caleb spent the hours pacing his small apartment, jumping at every sound, replaying Troy's words in the parking lot over and over in his mind, searching for clues he might have missed. On the third night, the call came that Caleb would remember for the rest of his life. He was sitting at the kitchen table with his mother, both of them barely touching the dinner in front of them when his phone rang. Bear's number. Caleb, listen to me carefully, Bear said, voice tight with urgency. Troy's truck just left his house. Mike's tracking him through a contact at the DMV who flagged the plate the second it pinged a traffic camera. He's heading in your direction. Caleb's blood turned to ice. He's coming here. We don't know for certain, but the route matches. I need you to stay inside, stay away from windows, and trust that we have this handled. Mike's already rerouting 8 bikes to intercept him before he gets anywhere near your building. Bear, what if He's not getting near you, Bear said, voice hard and absolute. I promise you that. Stay on the phone with me. Stay calm. We've got this. Diane gripped Caleb's free hand across the table, her knuckles white, both of them listening to the distant sound of sirens beginning to wail somewhere across town, growing louder, closer, weaving through the night in a direction that made Caleb's heart pound violently against his ribs. I see him. Bear's voice came through the phone, suddenly sharp and focused. Mike's got eyes on the truck. He's 3 blocks from your building, slowing down. The line went tense with silence, just the sound of Bear's breathing and distant engine noise. And Caleb sat frozen at his kitchen table, every second stretching into an eternity, his mother's hand crushing his own. He's stopping, Bear said. Mike and 4 others just boxed him in. Trucks surrounded Caleb. He's not getting anywhere near you. Relief crashed through Caleb's chest so suddenly, his vision blurred with tears, but Bear's voice cut through the moment sharper now. Wait, something's wrong. He's not getting out of the truck. What does that mean? Caleb asked, voice cracking. Means he might be more unstable than we thought, Bear said grimly. Mike's approaching carefully. Stay on the line. The seconds that followed felt like the longest of Caleb's entire life. The sound of muffled voices through the phone, Mike's authoritative tone trying to talk someone down, the distant wail of police sirens, finally arriving on scene, red and blue lights, presumably washing across Bear's face wherever he stood. Then finally, Bear's voice returned, exhausted but steady. He's out. Cops have him in cuffs. Gun was in the glove compartment, loaded. He never got the chance to use it. Caleb's whole body sagged with relief. His mother pulling him into a fierce hug. Both of them crying openly at the kitchen table, the terror of the last 48 hours finally breaking like a fever. It's over, Caleb whispered, more to himself than anyone. It's actually over. Almost. Bear said carefully, and something in his tone made Caleb's relief falter slightly. Attempted assault with a deadly weapon violation of a restraining order, illegal possession, given the active charges against him. This is enough to put him away for real time, Caleb. But there's still the trial, still his father's case. This isn't fully finished yet. But tonight you're safe. Tonight that's what matters. The arrest made headlines within hours, the story spreading even faster than the corruption investigation into Richard Dawson had just weeks earlier. College athlete arrested with loaded firearm near victim's home, violating restraining order. The narrative: Richard Dawson had spent weeks trying to manufacture bikers as dangerous criminals. Caleb, as an unstable aggressor, collapsed entirely under the weight of an arrest that left no room for spin. Detective Ruiz called Caleb the following morning, her voice carrying something close to genuine warmth for the first time since he'd met her. "DA's filing the maximum charges," she said. "Attempted assault with intent, weapons violation, restraining order breach. Given the pattern of escalation documented across multiple incidents, I don't think any judge is granting bail easily on this one." "What happens to him now?" Caleb asked. "Likely prison time, assuming conviction and given the evidence that's close to certain. His football career's over. His scholarship's already been revoked. And his father's facing his own trial in a few months for the corruption charges." Ruiz paused. "You did everything right through this whole ordeal, Caleb. Documented, reported, never retaliated. That matters. That's exactly the kind of conduct that makes cases like this airtight." Caleb thanked her quietly, hanging up the phone with a strange hollow feeling settling in his chest. Not quite triumph, not quite relief, but something more complicated. He hadn't wanted Troy's life destroyed. He'd just wanted to survive, to protect his mother, to stop looking over his shoulder every time he walked home from work. But sitting with that hollow feeling for only a moment, he realized something else underneath it. Gratitude deep and overwhelming for the family of strangers who'd made absolutely certain he lived long enough to feel any of this at all. Bear came by that evening alone. This time no procession of motorcycles, just him and his Harley, parked outside Caleb's apartment building like something almost ordinary, now almost familiar. "You holding up okay?" Bear asked, settling onto the front steps beside Caleb, the evening air cooling around them. "I don't know," Caleb admitted honestly. "Part of me feels like I should be happy. He's not coming after me anymore. His dad's company is collapsing. Everything that was threatening my life is falling apart." He paused, staring at his hands. "But another part of me just feels exhausted, like I aged 10 years in the last month." Bear nodded slowly, understanding settling into the lines of his weathered face. "That's normal, kid. Surviving something like this doesn't feel like winning a trophy. It feels like finally being allowed to put down something heavy you've been carrying without even realizing how heavy it was." "Why did you and Mike do all this for me?" Caleb asked quietly, the question he'd been turning over in his mind for weeks finally surfacing. "I mean, really. I get the loyalty thing, the code, all of it. But this is so much more than just saying thank you for a candy bar in a diner." Bear was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening street, something heavy and old moving behind his eyes. 22 years ago, Bear said finally, voice low, "I was 19, working a job not too different from yours, barely scraping by, family falling apart at the seams. Got jumped outside a bar one night by 4 guys who didn't like the way I looked at one of their girlfriends. Would have died in that parking lot if a stranger hadn't pulled them off me, a guy I'd never met who had absolutely nothing to gain by getting involved." "What happened to him?" Caleb asked. "Turned out he was patched with this same club," Bear said. "Same chapter even way back then. He didn't ask me to join, didn't expect anything from me. Just made sure I knew somebody in this world was willing to bleed for a stranger when it mattered. Changed the entire direction of my life. Eventually, years later, I earned my own patch, partly because I wanted to be the kind of man who'd do exactly what he did for me for somebody else someday." Caleb's eyes widened with understanding. "And then I came along. And then you came along." Bear confirmed, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. 18 years old, broke, beaten half to death, refusing to let go of a stranger's wrist because you couldn't stand the thought of him dying alone on a diner floor. You reminded every single one of us why this code matters in the first place. Why we don't just ride around looking tough. Why loyalty actually means something when it's tested instead of just talked about. Caleb felt his throat tighten, emotion welling up faster than he could process it. I never had anyone do anything like this for me before, he admitted quietly. My dad left before I could even remember him. It's just been me and my mom for as long as I can remember, scraping by, hoping nothing else goes wrong because we don't have any cushion for when it does. You've got cushion now, Bear said firmly. Real cushion. Family that's not going anywhere no matter what happens with Troy's trial, no matter what happens with his father's case. This isn't temporary, kid. This isn't us showing up for a crisis and disappearing once it's resolved. What is it then? Bear turned to look at him directly, something deeply sincere settling into his weathered features. It's the rest of your life having people who'll answer the phone at 3 a.m. if you need them. It's never walking into a room again wondering if anybody's got your back. It's exactly what you gave me on that diner floor, except now it's permanent, and it's pointed back at you. Weeks passed. The trial dates for both Troy and Richard Dawson were set months out, the wheels of justice grinding slowly but unmistakably forward. Caleb returned fully to his shifts at the diner, the fear gradually loosening its grip on his chest with each uneventful day that passed. Mike arranged for Caleb to begin an apprenticeship at a garage owned by a club associate, paid training real skills, a path toward a stable trade that didn't depend on minimum wage and the unpredictable kindness of strangers. Caleb hesitated at first, the old instinct to refuse charity flaring up reflexively. But Diane gently pushed him toward accepting it, recognizing an opportunity neither of them could have imagined just 2 months earlier. This isn't charity, she told him one evening, watching him study a textbook on automotive systems at their kitchen table, a textbook Bear had bought him without being asked. This is what happens when good people recognize good people. You earned this the moment you knelt down on that floor, baby. Let yourself have it. Caleb started the apprenticeship the following Monday, arriving nervous and uncertain, but within days discovering a genuine aptitude for the work, an instinct for understanding how things fit together, how to diagnose problems methodically. Patience that came naturally to someone who'd spent his whole life learning to make do with very little. The garage owner, a gruff but fair man named Hollis, who'd ridden with the club for 15 years, watched Caleb work for the first 2 weeks with quiet approval. You're a natural, Hollis told him one afternoon, watching Caleb correctly diagnose a transmission issue that had stumped him initially. Got good hands, good instincts. You keep this up, you'll have a real trade in a year, maybe less. Thank you, Caleb said, genuinely surprised by the praise. I didn't expect to actually be good at this. Most people don't know what they're good at until somebody finally gives them the chance to find out. Hollis said simply, clapping a hand on his shoulder before walking back toward his own workstation. That evening, riding home on the back of Bear's bike, a routine now something almost comforting in its familiarity, Caleb felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't quite expected to feel, given everything that had happened. Hope. Not the desperate, anxious hope of someone scraping by month to month, terrified of the next unexpected expense. Real hope. The kind built on actual foundation, a trade, of family that wasn't going anywhere. A mother who could finally breathe a little easier, knowing her son had people watching out for him. But hope, Caleb would soon learn, was always more fragile than it felt in the moment it arrived. Because 3 weeks before Troy's trial date, with the case seemingly airtight, and the Dawson family's collapse seemingly inevitable, Richard Dawson made one final desperate move, a move born from a man who had nothing left to lose, and everything still left to protect, a move that would force the Hells Angels into their most dangerous confrontation yet, and one that would test everything Caleb had come to believe about the family he'd found in the unlikeliest place imaginable. Orchestrated final narrative arc, Voi Num Ngin Ba Chum Tu Ket Tuk Mang Me. Orchestrated final narrative arc, Voi Num Ngin Ba Trum Tu Ket Tuk Mang Me. Richard Dawson sat alone in a hotel room 3 counties away, a burner phone in his hand, the kind he'd bought with cash specifically so no one could trace it back to him. His real phone sat powered off in a drawer at home, a decoy left behind to make it look like he was still in town, still cooperating, still the picture of a man calmly awaiting trial. He wasn't calmly awaiting anything. He was planning the last move he had left. The man on the other end of the burner line was someone Richard had used twice before years ago for things he'd never wanted documented. A man named Felix, who didn't ask questions as long as the money cleared first. "I need someone removed from a situation," Richard said, his voice low, clipped the careful diction of a man choosing every word like it might be played back to a jury someday. "Not permanently, just persuaded to disappear, recant a story, leave town, whatever it takes." "That's not cheap," Felix said. "And it's not exactly subtle, given the attention this kid's already getting." "I don't care what it costs," Richard said. "If Caleb Whitmore doesn't testify, half the case against my son falls apart. If he disappears before Troy's trial, there's no witness to the road incident, no credibility behind the original diner story. Without him, it's just bikers making noise and a media circus with no foundation. And the corruption case against you that doesn't depend on the kid at all." Richard's jaw tightened. "I'll deal with that separately. Right now, I need Troy's case gutted. That's the priority." Felix was quiet for a moment. "You understand what you're asking." "I understand exactly what I'm asking," Richard snapped. "Can you do it or not?" "For the right price, anything's possible," Felix said. 48 hours. Give me the kid's schedule." Richard exhaled slowly, the weight of what he'd just set into motion, settling cold and heavy in his chest, but he pushed it down. The way he'd pushed down every uncomfortable truth for 30 years of climbing toward money and power that now felt like it was slipping through his fingers like sand. "His shift's at the diner," Richard said. "Tuesday through Saturday. He walks home alone most nights now the bikers don't watch him every single hour, just rotate through." "That'll do," Felix said. 48 hours. What Richard Dawson didn't know, what he had no possible way of knowing, was that Sandra Cole had flagged unusual financial activity on a secondary account belonging to Richard's brother-in-law 2 days earlier, a small, almost forgettable account that had received a transfer just hours before this very phone call. She'd been tracking every thread connected to the Dawson family with the obsessive thoroughness of someone who understood exactly how much was riding on getting this right. "Mike, I need you to see this immediately," Sandra said, calling the clubhouse directly, her voice tight with urgency. Money moved from an account linked to Richard's brother-in-law into an account registered to a shell company. $40,000 wired this afternoon. "What's the shell company?" Mike asked. "Registered to a man named Felix Aronson. I pulled his record: assault, intimidation, one attempted kidnapping charge that got dropped years ago on a technicality. This isn't a contractor payment, Mike. This is somebody being hired to do something ugly." Mike's blood ran cold, the pieces snapping together with terrifying clarity. "He's going after Caleb." "That's my read too," Sandra said. "I don't have proof of intent yet, just the money trail. But $40,000 doesn't move that fast for anything legal." Mike was already moving, phone pressed against his shoulder while he grabbed his vest, shouting across the clubhouse. "Bear Diesel. Everybody now. Dawson hired someone we don't know, who we don't know exactly when, but Caleb's in immediate danger." The clubhouse erupted into controlled chaos. Men grabbing keys, checking phones. The kind of practiced urgency that came from years of handling crises that couldn't wait for slow, careful planning. Within minutes, Mike was on the phone with Detective Ruiz, relaying everything Sandra had found. "This is enough for a warrant on Richard Dawson's location," Ruiz said immediately, her own voice sharpening with alarm. "Conspiracy to commit assault, possible kidnapping charges, depending on what Felix Aronson's actually been hired to do. I'll get units to Caleb's apartment and the diner right now." "We're already moving," Mike said. "But Ruiz, if this Felix character is already in motion, your units might not get there in time. We will." Caleb had no idea any of this was happening. He was 3 hours into his shift at the diner, wiping down the counter in the lull between lunch and dinner, rushes, his mind occupied with nothing more dramatic than memorizing torque specifications for his apprenticeship the next morning, when Mr. Reyes called him into the back office, his face tight with worry. "Bear's on the phone," Mr. Reyes said, handing him the receiver of the diner's old landline. Says it's urgent. Caleb. Bear's voice came through clipped and fast, none of his usual warmth softening the edges. Listen to me very carefully. We have reason to believe Richard Dawson hired someone to come after you. We don't know exactly when, we don't know exactly how, but we're not taking chances. Caleb's stomach dropped straight through the floor. Hired someone like to hurt me. Possibly worse, Bear said, and the honesty in his voice was somehow more terrifying than if he'd softened it. We don't know yet. I need you to stay inside the diner. Don't go outside for any reason. Don't take out the trash. Don't walk to your car if you've got one parked, nothing. I'm 15 minutes out. Diesel's closer, maybe 5. Bear, my mom. Already calling her. Mike's got someone heading to your apartment right now, too. A pause, then quieter, more urgent. Caleb, I need you to trust me on this. Stay inside. Lock the doors if you can. We're coming. Caleb hung up the phone, his hands shaking, and relayed everything to Mr. Reyes, whose face went pale as he immediately moved to lock the front entrance, flipping the sign to closed despite the customers still finishing their meals. Everybody needs to finish up and head out, Mr. Reyes announced, voice tight but controlled. We're closing early today. A few customers grumbled confused, but something in Mr. Reyes' expression discouraged any real argument. Within minutes, the diner had emptied except for Caleb, Mr. Reyes, and the cook, all 3 of them standing near the kitchen, watching the parking lot through the front windows with rising tension. Then a car pulled in. Not Troy's truck. Not anything Caleb recognized. A plain gray sedan with tinted windows that parked at an angle near the edge of the lot, far enough from the entrance to not draw immediate suspicion, but close enough to watch the building clearly. That's him, Caleb whispered, his entire body going rigid. That has to be him. Mr. Reyes grabbed the phone, already dialing 911, while Caleb watched through the window with his heart hammering violently against his ribs, watching the driver's side door of the sedan slowly open. A man stepped out, mid-40s, average build, nothing visually threatening about him, except for the deliberate, unhurried way he walked, like someone who'd done this exact thing many times before, and felt no urgency about getting caught. He's coming toward the diner, Caleb said, voice barely above a whisper. Doors locked, Mr. Reyes said, hanging up after relaying the address to the 911 dispatcher. He can't get in unless he breaks the glass. The man tried the door handle first, finding it locked, and paused, glancing through the glass directly at the 3 of them standing frozen near the kitchen. His expression didn't shift at all. No anger, no frustration, just a calm, calculating assessment, like he was simply recalculating his approach. Then in the distance, the unmistakable rumble of motorcycle engines began rising over the quiet afternoon air, growing louder by the second. The man at the door glanced over his shoulder, and for the first time, something flickered across his composed expression. Recognition, then concern, then the early stages of genuine alarm. He turned and walked quickly back toward his sedan, just as the first motorcycle roared into the parking lot, Diesel leaning hard into the turn, cutting off the sedan's exit path before the man could even reach his door handle. "Don't move!" Diesel shouted, swinging off his bike, his voice carrying a weight that made even a hardened professional like Felix Aronson hesitate. But Felix wasn't an amateur. He lunged for his car door anyway, clearly calculating that one biker alone might not be enough to stop him, that he could still force his way past and disappear before backup arrived. He was wrong. As Bear's bike screamed into the lot seconds later, followed by 3 more boxing, the sedan in completely before Felix could even start the engine. He sat frozen behind the wheel, surrounded on all sides, his calm professional composure finally cracking under the weight of being genuinely, inescapably trapped. Inside the diner, Caleb watched through the window with his heart still pounding. Relief and terror tangled together so tightly he couldn't separate them, watching Bear dismount and approach the sedan with controlled, deliberate fury. "Get out of the car," Bear said, voice low and dangerous. Felix didn't move at first, clearly weighing his options. And for one terrifying moment, Caleb thought he might do something reckless, reach for a weapon, try to ram his way out. something that would turn this confrontation violent in a way that could hurt Bear or any of the others. But then the wail of police sirens cut through the tension, growing louder closer, and Felix's shoulders sagged in defeat. He raised both hands, slowly visible through the windshield, and unlocked the car door. Detective Ruiz arrived within minutes, her own car screeching into the lot, 2 patrol units right behind her. She approached the scene with practiced authority, taking in the boxed-in sedan, the circle of bikers, the diner's locked front door, with 3 terrified faces still visible through the glass. "Step away from the vehicle," Ruiz instructed Bear and the others, and they complied immediately, retreating just enough to let her officers approach with proper procedure while still maintaining a visible, watchful presence. Felix was pulled from the car and searched, and what they found in his jacket pocket made even Detective Ruiz's professionally composed expression flicker with genuine alarm. A syringe filled with a clear liquid, later identified as a powerful sedative, along with zip ties and duct tape tucked into a duffel bag in the back seat. "This wasn't an assault plan," Ruiz said, grimly examining the evidence laid out on the hood of the patrol car. "This was an abduction plan." Caleb, finally allowed to step outside. Once the scene was secured, felt his knees nearly give out at the words, Mr. Reyes catching his arm to steady him. "They were going to take me," Caleb said, the realization landing like a physical blow. "Not just hurt me, take me somewhere." Bear was at his side, immediately steadying him with both hands on his shoulders, his expression a complicated mixture of fury and relief. "You're safe," Bear said firmly. "He never got close enough to touch you. You hear me? Never got close." "Why?" Caleb said, voice cracking. "Why would Richard Dawson do this? His own son's trial is already happening. Why would he risk? Because desperate men don't think clearly," Mike said, arriving on scene moments later, his expression carved from stone as he surveyed the situation. "He thought eliminating you as a witness would save his son. Instead, he just handed himself a federal kidnapping conspiracy charge on top of everything else." Felix, sitting handcuffed in the back of a patrol car, stared straight ahead, saying nothing. The kind of silence that came from a man already calculating his own legal strategy, already preparing to cut a deal that would implicate the person who'd hired him in exchange for a lighter sentence. Within 24 hours, that exact deal materialized. Felix Aronson, facing kidnapping conspiracy charges that carried decades in federal prison, agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing recorded phone records, the wire transfer documentation, and a detailed statement confirming Richard Dawson had hired him specifically to remove Caleb Whitmore as a witness through abduction and intimidation. Detective Ruiz called Caleb that evening with news that finally fully cracked open the relief he'd been waiting weeks to feel. "We found Richard Dawson," she said. "Hotel 3 counties over, using a fake name to check in. Local PD took him into custody an hour ago. Conspiracy to commit kidnapping on top of everything else already pending against him." "It's over," Caleb said quietly, the words feeling almost foreign after everything. "Actually, completely over. Almost." Ruiz said, a note of genuine warmth entering her voice for the first time in this entire ordeal. "There's still the trials, Troy's then Richard's separately though. Given Felix's cooperation, I expect both men to take plea deals rather than risk a jury seeing all this evidence. But you're safe, Caleb. Genuinely fully safe. That family has nothing left to fight with." The plea deals came 3 weeks later, exactly as Ruiz predicted. Troy Dawson pleaded guilty to assault, violation of a restraining order, and attempted assault with a deadly weapon, accepting a sentence of 6 years with the possibility of parole. After 4, his football career and scholarship already permanently gone, his future reshaped entirely by choices he'd made in the span of a few furious, arrogant weeks, Richard Dawson's plea deal was far heavier. Bribery, fraud, falsified safety inspections that had endangered hundreds of residents across multiple properties, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping layered on top of everything else. He accepted a sentence of 14 years. His company dissolved his assets, seized his name, transformed overnight from local philanthropist to cautionary tale. Caleb sat in the courtroom for both sentencing hearings, Bear and Mike on either side of him, Diane holding his hand tightly throughout. He felt no satisfaction watching Troy or Richard led away in handcuffs, just a quiet, exhausted relief that the danger was finally fully, permanently gone. Outside the courthouse, after Richard's sentencing, reporters swarmed the steps, cameras flashing microphones thrust toward Caleb's face the moment he stepped outside. "Caleb, how does it feel knowing the man who tried to have you kidnapped is going to prison for over a decade?" Caleb paused, considering the question seriously despite the chaos around him. Bear's steady presence beside him grounding his thoughts. "I didn't want any of this," Caleb said finally, his voice carrying clearly despite the crowd. "I just wanted to help someone who was dying on a diner floor. Everything after that, the violence, the lies, the danger, none of that was something I chose. But I learned something through all of it." He glanced sideways at Bear, then at Mike standing just behind him, then back at the cameras. "I learned that when you do the right thing, even when it costs you everything, the right people show up. Not because they have to, because that's who they are." The clip ran on every local news station that evening, and within days had spread far beyond the county, picked up by national outlets fascinated by the story of a poor diner worker who'd earned the protection of an entire motorcycle club through a single act of selfless courage. 6 months passed. Caleb completed his apprenticeship under Hollis's patient guidance, earning his certification as a mechanic faster than anyone at the garage had expected. His natural aptitude finally given the space and support to flourish. He and Diane moved into a slightly larger apartment, the financial strain that had defined their entire lives together finally easing into something manageable, something almost stable. He still worked occasional shifts at the diner on weekends, not because he needed the money anymore, but because Mr. Reyes had become something like family, and because the diner itself, despite everything that had happened there, held a strange, complicated significance. Caleb wasn't ready to walk away from completely. The bikers never fully disappeared from his life either, though their presence shifted from constant vigilance to something warmer, more natural. Sunday dinners at the clubhouse, Diane had grown to genuinely enjoy casual rides with Bear on slow weekend afternoons. Mike checking in periodically, just to ask how the apprenticeship was going, the way any proud uncle might. On a warm evening, exactly 6 months after the day, everything began. The club held a gathering at the clubhouse, not for any particular occasion, just one of the regular events that brought brothers and their families together, music playing, food, grilling, the easy laughter of people who'd built something lasting out of loyalty, tested and proven. Caleb stood near the edge of the gathering, a soda in hand, watching the scene with a quiet sense of wonder that still hadn't fully faded even after half a year of being part of it. Bear approached, settling beside him with 2 plates of food, handing one over without a word. "You doing okay, kid?" Bear asked the familiar question, carrying entirely different weight now than it had the first time he'd asked it in a hospital doorway. "Better than okay," Caleb said, honestly glancing around at the gathering. Diane laughing with a group of the other members' wives, Mike deep in conversation with Hollis near the grill diesel, teaching a group of kids how to properly polish chrome. "I keep waiting for this to feel less surreal. It hasn't yet. Maybe it's not supposed to." Bear said, a faint smile tugging at his weathered face. "Maybe some things are just supposed to stay a little surreal, so you never forget how rare they actually are." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the gathering washing over them, engines occasionally revving in the distance, laughter, music, the particular texture of a community that had chosen each other deliberately, rather than simply being born into proximity. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb said finally. "Always. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I'd just stayed behind the counter that day, if I hadn't gotten down on the floor, hadn't said anything to Troy?" Bear considered the question seriously, his expression thoughtful. "I'd probably be dead," he said simply. "No, probably about it, actually. I would be dead. You know that better than anyone, since you're the one who kept me alive. But everything else," Caleb pressed. "All of this, the danger, the threats, almost getting kidnapped, watching my mom be terrified for months. Do you ever wonder if it was worth it? If I'd been better off just minding my own business?" Bear set down his plate, turning to face Caleb fully, his expression serious in a way that demanded full attention. Let me tell you something, and I want you to really hear it. You didn't choose any of the danger that came after. Troy chose that. Richard chose that. Every single piece of darkness that followed your decision was somebody else's choice, not yours. All you did, the only thing you actually controlled, was decide not to let a stranger die alone on a diner floor. That's it. That's the whole decision you made. But it caused so much, it caused other people's cruelty to surface, Bear corrected firmly. It didn't create that cruelty. Troy was always capable of what he did. Richard was always willing to bribe and lie, and eventually try to have a kid kidnapped to protect himself. Your kindness didn't manufacture their darkness, Caleb. It just happened to be standing close enough to expose it. He paused, his voice softening. And in exposing it, you ended up saving a lot more than just my life. Those falsified inspections, Richard was running buildings that could have caught fire, structures that could have collapsed. People could have died in those buildings someday because he cut corners to save money. Sandra's investigation, the one that started because of what you did for me, that investigation likely saved lives nobody will ever know about. Caleb absorbed that slowly, something settling in his chest that felt different from relief, different from gratitude, something closer to a quiet, hard-earned sense of purpose. I never thought about it that way, he admitted. Most heroes don't, Bear said. They just see the mess directly in front of them and the price they paid for it. Took me years to understand the actual ripple of what that stranger did for me 22 years ago. You'll probably spend years understanding the full ripple of what you did too. Mike approached them, then drawn by something in their expressions, settling into the conversation with the easy familiarity of someone who'd become as close to Caleb as Bear had over the past 6 months. You two look serious for a party. Mike observed a faint smile in his weathered eyes. Just talking about how everything started, Caleb said. Good place to start, Mike said, nodding slowly. Good place to remember from, too. Easy to forget how fragile a single decision can be once enough time passes and the dust settles. He clapped a hand on Caleb's shoulder, the same gesture he'd used the very first day they'd met on that empty stretch of road. You ever regret it, knowing everything that followed? Caleb thought about the question seriously, weighing it honestly against everything the last 6 months had cost and given him: the fear, the danger, the exhaustion of watching his mother cry at the kitchen table, balanced against the unshakable certainty that he now belonged somewhere, that he was no longer the invisible kid scraping by unnoticed, that he'd found a family fiercer and more devoted than blood had ever managed to be. No, Caleb said finally with complete certainty. Not even once. Mike's smile deepened, something proud and warm settling into his weathered features. Good answer. The three of them stood together as the sun began to dip lower over the clubhouse. The gathering around them growing louder, warmer, more alive with the easy rhythm of a community that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger for it. Diesel called Caleb over to help with something near the grill, and he excused himself, jogging off into the crowd of people who'd become against every possible expectation his family. Bear watched him go, something deeply satisfied settling into his chest, the same chest that 6 months ago had nearly stopped beating on a diner floor, if not for a skinny, broke teenager who'd refused to let a stranger die alone. You did good finding him, Mike said quietly, watching alongside him. He found me, Bear corrected. I just made sure we never let him go afterward. Across the gathering, Caleb laughed at something Diesel said. Flour or grease smudged across his forearm from helping with the grill, completely unaware of the conversation happening behind him. Completely transformed from the frightened, exhausted boy who'd once stood frozen in the middle of an empty road surrounded by 50 motorcycles. He was no longer the invisible kid behind the diner counter, eating free lunch in silent shame, calculating rent money down to the dollar, with no margin for anything going wrong. He was an apprentice mechanic with a real future ahead of him. He was a son whose mother no longer cried from financial desperation, but from gratitude. He was against every cruel twist his life had handed him before that single ordinary afternoon, exactly what Bear had told him he'd become the very first day they'd met on that broken stretch of road. He was family. And as the sun set fully over the clubhouse, painting the sky in deep, warm colors that stretched across the gathered crowd of leather and laughter and second chances, Caleb Whitmore understood with absolute and unshakable clarity that one small act of courage, one decision to kneel down on a diner floor and refuse to let a stranger die alone, had not just saved a man's life that day. It had rebuilt his own completely and permanently from the ground up. And nothing, not Troy Dawson's cruelty, not Richard Dawson's corruption, not all the danger and fear that had tried to tear it apart along the way, would ever take that away from him again.